time for those of you who are here with us. Thank you so much for coming. You guys hear me okay? All right. So my name is Michele Simon, and I am Executive Director of the PlantBased Foods Association, which is a trade group I'll tell you more about in a bit, and I'm the moderator for this session. And I'm very excited to be here, and shout out to New Hope for giving us a day of panel celebrating the plant-based revolution. And we're going to focus this panel on the milk, the dairy aisles, milks and other dairy alternatives. And with us to have this discussion is Dr. Cheryl Mitchell, who is with Elmhurst. She is the Senior Vice President for Ingredient Manufacturing and the mastermind behind the amazing new Elmhurst brand of plant-based milks. And if you haven't checked out their booth upstairs at the Convention Center, I highly recommend it. And then also with us is Doug Radi, the CEO of Good Karma Foods, which is another wonderful brand that focuses on flaxseed milk. And Doug has a long history in the natural food world. So we have two wonderful participants here to have a great discussion. And we're going to start with a presentation by myself, and then Cheryl's going to give some slides. And then Doug will speak briefly, and then we're just going to really have a good, robust conversation about the category and all exciting things. And with that, I think I'll kick it off with my slides, and hopefully the technology will work this time. Oh, yay. Okay, there we go. So first, just a bit about, if you're not familiar with the Plant-Based Foods Association, it's a trade group that I founded in 2016, last year, with these wonderful 5 founding board members: Daya Foods, Follow Your Heart, Miyoko's Kitchen, Tofurky, and Upton's Naturals. And we, in just less than 2 years, year and a half exactly, we're up to about 80 voting members. And those companies span different categories you see here: packaged food companies, ingredient suppliers, restaurants, all folks that are passionate about promoting and selling plant-based foods. So it's been a really exciting time for the industry, and now we have banded together. And our mission is pretty simple: to ensure a fair, competitive marketplace for businesses selling plant-based foods, so making sure companies are promoted well in the retail and food service sectors, and then promoting policies that improve conditions in the plant-based foods industry. So I'm an attorney policy wonk of many years, and I know how important policy is to ensuring the success of any industry. And so now this relatively new sector of the food industry has a collective voice in Washington, and that's really important. We're going to hear why in a few minutes. And then finally, to educate about the myriad benefits of plant-based foods. So I want to start with some consumer trend survey on this growing category. And from some survey results, we know that 58% of adults drink non-dairy milks. And how it breaks down in terms of personal consumption versus others in the household is 49% personally drink it versus 37% reporting that another adult. So there may be, and that's pretty common where there are mixed households. So you have, people who are maybe have a dairy allergy, of whatever reason, choosing to not drink milk. And so, purchasers, you see families that some people drink cow's milk and some don't. And then what I found a really interesting statistic from Intel, which is that only 10% of drinkers themselves exclusively drink alternatives. Is that a stat that you know? Okay, good, because it actually raised my eyebrow when I saw it. I'm like, I hope that's accurate, because I want to make sure. But that 90% also, that's, I think, really important to know that we can reach almost anybody, because apparently it's pretty common that people will drink both, and they may have different reasons. So if they like a certain type of milk in their coffee or whatever. So, and then I wanted to tell you about, for those who were in the previous session, I apologize, some of this will be redundant, but we just did a really exciting new project with Nielsen in collaboration with our colleagues at the Good Food Institute, which was to actually define every single category of plant-based foods, and then ask Nielsen for the point of purchase sales data from the retail stores that they work with, so that we can get a full picture of what this industry looks like in terms of retail sales. And so we just got this data in time for Expo East, so pretty excited about it. And so it represents the past year and in all channels plus Whole Foods. So Whole Foods just started making its data available to Nielsen. So we think it's a pretty comprehensive. It's not 100% of the retail sector, but it's a pretty good representation. So just drilling down to the data related to the dairy alternative category that we're talking about here, it showed that the combined category of dairy alternatives, which includes the items you see here, the growth, and that was the most important data that we found, the growth of that category is 20%, which is really huge. The highest growth within those individual categories is coming from yogurt, because it's still a pretty new category. And if you see out there, you know, there's just so many different varieties of yogurt. So that's growing at 56%. Ice cream, which is always an important category, is growing at 26%. And then cheese, and we're seeing just all kinds of new varieties of cheese alternatives on the market as well, is growing at 19%. And then milk's, of course, a more mature category, so we're not seeing the same high numbers of growth. It does represent about half of the total dollar figure, and so the total dollar figure for all categories, including meat alternatives, was at over $3 billion. So the milk category is growing at just over 3%, but what's most important about that figure is the comparison to cow's milk, which is down 5%. And you know, this is consistent with data that we know about Americans just consuming less milk, but it was particularly striking to see it from this sales data. And so meaning there's an 8% gap basically between the growth of plant-based milk versus cow's milk. So, you know, that's certainly the most important trend to think about. And then I just want to give you some examples of our members, PBFA members, and the varieties of milk. And this is just to point you to a really handy resource on our website, which we did a directory, essentially, of our members. And so you can click on dairy alternatives and meat alternatives and actually drill down to, you know, who's making ice cream and who's making yogurt. And it's just a fun way to kind of see, at least from our members. And, you know, we don't have every company yet, but we're getting there. So just talking about the milk category now, we have just, you know, giving you some examples of the wide range of products that are out there. So obviously, you know, soy milk's been around a while, and now almond milk has, you know, also been around. But then there are these other varieties of milk by some newer companies like Malk, you know, selling pecan milk, which I just think is wonderful. And of course, Califia Farms in California, and then Doug's company selling flax milk, and then these also innovative examples of vegetable milk, and then banana milk is now a thing. And those are just our members. And then I just listed some other source ingredients at the bottom. I mean, it just seems like, you know, there's really no end in sight to the variety of sources for plant-based milks out there. So, and of course, the other sign that this is a growing category is that big companies are taking notice of this huge consumer trend. And so these are just two examples of, again, our members who happen to, in the case of Dea, have been acquired by a large company. And in the case of Good Karma, having Dean Foods take a percentage stake in that company. And what this means is that, you know, these companies are bringing their resources to help grow this category, and that's really important to be able to compete in the market. So now we want to talk about the politics of all of this. And so, you know, there's no better sign of success than getting a bill introduced in Congress that is attempting to bring you down. So that's what happened in January when the dairy industry went to its friends in Congress and got something they're calling the Dairy Pride Act introduced. And Dairy Pride stands for something that I can't possibly commit to memory because it's too long and rather absurd. But the point is, this is what the bill would do. So interestingly, I was just talking to some colleagues about goat milk. Goat milk is not defined in FDA law. The word milk actually means coming from a cow. It's the lacteal secretions from a cow, according to FDA regulations, right? And just to back up a step, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, defines many food categories in a certain way in order to protect the integrity of those foods. And so milk is defined under FDA law as the lactose secretions of a cow. So the first thing this bill would do would to actually redefine that to milk from being from a hooved animal. And the only explanation I can think of for this is that the goat milk lobby, whoever they are, must have teamed up with the cow's milk people and said, hey, we want in on this. We want to make sure goat milk can be called goat milk. So it's just a funny little thing that's in the bill. That has really nothing to do with plant-based, but I just think it's funny. But more importantly, it would not allow any of these companies that we're talking about here today to use words like milk, cheese, or yogurt. Okay, so obviously almost all of these companies are using some variation on these words because these are words that consumers understand, but they're not using them alone, using them with qualifiers like dairy-free, like alternative, and so forth to make sure consumers know because they're trying to reach that consumer who's looking for the alternative. But the dairy industry thinks that they own the English language, and so they want Congress to essentially bar companies to be able to use these terms. And so as a result of that, we are now in a fight with the dairy lobby that we did not pick or ask for, but that's what's happening. And so no better reason than did we need the Plant-Based Foods Association than this type of bill being introduced. And so I want to just give a shout out to our lobbyist, Shannon Campagna, who's here today. Thank you, Shannon. She is our wonderful representative in Washington, D.C., and she's fighting hard to stop this dairy bill from passing, and I'm going to be joining her with a board member on Monday, and we're going to be meeting with as many members of the Senate in this case as we can, because we want to make sure members of Congress obviously are aware of this and don't let this bill go through. So, so that's sort of the politics situation. Happy to talk more about that, but you know, it's not a guarantee that we can stop it, but we're certainly doing all we can to do that. So the positive news, though, about this bill being introduced is that it's actually helped put PBFA and many of our members on the map. So really, since it was introduced, we've had all kinds of, I mean, I'm actually pretty handy with media myself, if I like to say. And so, you know, I actually pitched a story to the New York Times on it because I knew that they would probably be interested in it in a way that I thought would help us. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. They did a lengthy article about it, and it came out very much in favor of, you know, our side of the story. And so these are just some examples of news articles that have really made the dairy lobby look stupid and petty for doing this, because they are. And they've probably gotten a couple of members coming to us as a result. So, you know, someday I might send the commission check to the dairy industry or something for, but it has really helped us get our story told, and that's been a obviously wonderful positive thing. So this is our response. Obviously, we met Shannon, and we're also collaborating with other groups. So the Soy Foods Association, of course, is fighting it. Some of the larger companies, we're banded together to fight this bill. So that's been a good thing, of course. And colleagues at the Good Food Institute are also helping us fight this bill. And then, of course, we're mobilizing our membership, and it's certainly giving them something to fight for. And then, you know, our position is that, you know, there's no question the dairy industry is suffering economically, and I have a lot of sympathy for certainly family farmers that are having a hard time. Unfortunately, there's nothing in this bill that can possibly help them. So just because, you know, almond milk, or if almond milk would no longer be able to use the term almond or milk, people aren't going to go back to drinking cow's milk because it's called almond beverage, right? So, I mean, that's the most heartbreaking thing for me, and when we talk to members of Congress, that's the main message that I bring, is that this is just an illogical, it's not the right solution to the problem, basically. And that, in fact, as I said earlier, there's no consumer confusion, which the dairy industry has been claiming, that these products are properly labeled with the right terminology to, you know, indicate what these products are. However, we do recognize that there is an inconsistency in how the labels are currently out there. So, some companies are using milk alternatives, some companies are putting dairy-free, here, there. So what we have done at the trade group level is formed a standards committee. So this is, our alternative solution to what we don't think is necessarily a problem in the way that the dairy industry likes to think it is, but is rather a challenge that this industry faces that we want to help solve, which is to create a consistency in approach to labeling. So that's why we formed a standards committee, and milk is in fact the first category that this group of member companies is taking up, and we have started that process of deliberation, and we're going to do a consumer survey to help get some information about the best way forward. And then just some quick updates since the bill has been introduced. So the good news is that one of the two major dairy lobbies, which is the International Dairy Foods Association, actually announced in the spring that they were backing off the bill. And this was a big victory for us, and that's because that organization actually represents companies that make both dairy milk and plant-based alternatives. So, they got the message from their members this was not something that they should pursue, so they're no longer pushing for it. Unfortunately, the other component of the dairy lobby in the National Milk Producers Federation, which represents dairy producers, so mostly dairy farmers, large co-ops, they have dug in their heels even further and are definitely still pushing for the bill, and they are very powerful in Congress. So they are our main opponent. The FDA, for its part, the dairy industry has said FDA is not doing its job and enforcing the law, and they're just so mad at the FDA. Well, the FDA doesn't seem to see this as a priority. And obviously the FDA has a lot of important issues on its plate, things, like food safety, a little bit more important than what's on an almond milk container, right? So we think that's good news. We're fine with FDA kind of hanging back, and PBFA has engaged in conversation with FDA to let them know that, we are on it. We are coming up with an industry-led voluntary solution, and they appear to be open to that and are, working with us in a constructive, collaborative way, which is, how we think this problem should be solved. And then our next steps are continue to meet with members of Congress, keep an eye on upcoming legislation. You may have heard things can get kind of shifty in Congress. I know it's surprising that they would do things in an underhanded way in that body, but we don't think the bill would move on its own because it's just not important enough, and we've met with the committee members to know that they wouldn't prioritize it, but we do know that there are all kinds of sneaky ways that lobbyists can team up with members to get bills passed, and the most common sneaky way is to attach it to a larger bill, another piece of legislation that has to move, right? So an example being the Farm Bill, which comes around every 4 years and is coming up in 2018, and we know that members of Congress are actually drafting it as we speak, and so we're concerned that this bill could just easily get tucked in. I mean, it's only, it's probably a page or two long in like a 400-page document, right? Perfect vehicle to sneak something like this into. And so it's something, again, we're trying to really educate members about to try and stop that from happening. So it could happen. But also want to let folks know that it doesn't mean the end of the story, even if this bill passes, because first of all, FDA still has to act. It's not an automatic thing. It does require FDA action. And also we have something called the First Amendment in this country, which basically says that the government has to have a really good reason to restrict the speech, essentially, even of companies in a commercial way. So obviously there's free speech for political reasons, which is very protected, but even companies on labeling, in marketing, in advertising in general, have certain protections under the First Amendment. And so, I also fall back on that argument with members of Congress, like, well, even if you pass this bill, we're going to get our team of lawyers together and stop it that way. So, we have other tools in the toolbox, so we'll see what happens. And meantime, our standards committee work continues. So, I thought I'd end with just a few of the milk industry's talking points, and we can kind of circle back to to them to have some discussion. So, the milk industry likes to talk about, obviously, they feel very proprietary about this term milk. They say it only comes from a cow, that you cannot milk an almond. That's one of their favorite cutesy talking points in the media. And then they talk a lot about plant-based milk companies being imitators, right? So they love to toss the word imitation around there, and that we're, trading on milk's good name. So we love to talk about that. And then what they've really been pushing more lately is this idea that milk is some kind of gold standard for nutrition, right? So that as if, consumers are just, suffering from some sort of milk deprivation syndrome by not drinking cow's milk, but by drinking a plant-based alternative. And so it's just an interesting idea that, we have all kinds of counter talking points for, but we'd love to bring our panelists in to discuss as well. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Cheryl and see if your slides come up next. They do.
Thank
Great.
you.
Yep.
So a little bit about my background. I've been in the industry for 35 years and creating non-dairy alternatives since the rice stream were my patents, and with Imagine Foods and getting that out in the market. So it's kind of correct that I'm doing a little bit of a historical background just to bring everything into perspective with regards to the changes that are occurring in the dairy aisle right now. And so I wanted to take a look at a few things, and hopefully, yep. So here we're looking at alternative non-dairy milk beverage development, and many of you might be aware that in the non-dairy beverages, particularly soy and rice, have been around for thousands of years. Rice in the form of amazake, and the soy milk, of course, has been appreciated in the Asian countries for a very long time. Not so much in the US, but it was there. In the 1980s, we started to see the first aseptic packages coming over from Asia, and these were low-acid aseptic. So we're talking about milks pH neutral, so pretty much in the area of 6 to 7.5. So this was a really big change in the industry, and probably the number one reason that we have non-dairy beverages really out in the public domain right now is because of what happened in the low-acid aseptics. If you look at all these cartons up there on the screen, those are low-acid aseptic. These are shelf-stable cartons. Now, this was kind of an interesting thing because at the time that the low-acid aseptic was coming into play in the 1990s, two main manufacturers were going, both Steuben Foods and on the West Coast, it was California Natural Products, which was also my company. And we were doing the rice stream. It gave us a chance to get out there into the retailers. Obviously, the consumers were not so aware of the non-dairy milks and what they were all about. They understood soy, but nobody really cared about soy too much, so the turns were slow. Obviously, we couldn't be in the fresh market, but we got into the low-acid aseptic, and everybody said, and oddly enough, understood it. So when the milk and the dairy industry first started to put milk, dairy milk, into the low-acid aseptic, nobody purchased it. It was a dead deal right off the get-go because Americans wanted to see fresh milk. Okay, but as soon as we started putting the rice stream and the soy products into the low-acid aseptic, everybody said, oh, I got that. That's shelf-stable. It doesn't need to be refrigerated. And Americans had not seen this type of package. If they had traveled in Europe, they would have seen a lot more. Europe was about 20 years ahead of us at that time. And it was all related to distribution. So with the slow turns, getting the consumer awareness, this is really what made, in the 1990s, gave us an opportunity. But interestingly enough, was it competing with the dairy industry? It was not. The dairy industry was refrigerated. We were somewhere in the middle of the store shelves, low-acid, shelf-stable, and it was sometimes in the baking section, sometimes it was next to the cereal. The number one usage of these type of products, and they were designed specifically for one usage, and that was over cereal. So it was an alternative functionally product, and it was also there for another reason. So soy milk had a very high level of nutrition, but not particularly a taste profile that the Americans liked. Rice Dream came into play specifically because they were looking for something other than soy. And so when we developed that product, it was actually pretty frustrating because we had to pull out a lot of the nutritional value. But it was functional. It looked like milk, it poured like milk, everybody was
Why did you have to pull out the nutritional value?
The processing on the low acid aseptic side required high temperature processing. And with the protein and the fiber that would form an aggregate so that it would foul up all the heat exchangers. So that was pulled out. Same thing with the okara in the soy milk. So that had to be pulled out, so we were losing a lot of the proteins out of the soy milk as well. Even when the Almond Breeze came up with their products, that's what limited them to just a couple of almonds in there, because if they used any more almonds in there, it would foul the heat exchangers. So good products, good functionality with regards to over cereal, drinkability, but we're not in the dairy case. Okay, so at that point, and getting back to the legislation, the dairy industry was kind of fighting the whole deal about, you can see it, soy milk or writing. Rice Dream chose not to ever use the term rice milk at the time. They did with the soy milk, mainly from a nutritional point of view. It's kind of interesting. They call it rice drink and then soy milk. It's an anomaly at the time. Almond Breeze was using almond milk. But yeah, the dairy industry jumped on them during that time period too. They lost the battle. But they had a good point with regards to nutrition, and we'll talk about that later. But here again, we're not competing with dairy. We're not in the dairy aisle. And it wasn't until the 2000, maybe, which I called the Refrigerated Fresh Era. Okay, so in 2000, we had enough consumer awareness of non-dairy beverages and of all these beverages that we could now jump into the dairy aisle. Now that was a big thing. So, and also the natural foods industry itself was growing. So we were tired of being next to the cereal or in the baking section, and we wanted to be forefront right there with the refrigerated products, fresh products, and we had the turns. Okay, so it made sense now to get these products all out in the refrigerated process. Same type of product, again, starting with soy milk, the almond milk, the rice beverage, coconut milk entered the stage, and then they started getting a little bit with the cashew, but notice again the calories on the cashew. So we were still fighting the same problem with the processors. Going into making these products, we would be fouling the heat exchanger unless that we took care of the nutritional parts of it and pulled some of the protein out along with the fiber. So again, we had a lot of limitations, but we were now in the dairy aisle, trying to go head to head. During that same period, and we still see in the center aisles of the store, which most of the natural foods industry don't shop too much the center aisles of the store, they walk around the outside, but it's trying to see where the trends are and the trending of the new future. Notice all these packages are low acid aseptic, so they're all shelf stable. So when we don't think that there's going to be the turns, this gives us an opportunity to keep it out there on the shelf longer and get it out there. But there's another trend that's kind of lurking behind the scenes on this one. So we started to see in the 2000s all kinds of blends of the nuts, fortification with proteins and whatnot. We also saw some nutraceutical developments in the case of the temps, same thing as the flax a little bit later on. Mixtures of oats and grains, different resources, all having the same limitation though. Okay, and that was with regards to how much proteins we can actually get in there and get from the main source of the product that we're working with. So looking at the market landscape, and this is really extraordinary. So here we are up through 2000, 2015. Take a look at where we are really as the alternative milk and the dairy milk and the whole pie. We're at 6% of the volume. It's like a ceiling that we just can't break through. And for the longest time, we thought that ceiling was related to, well, it doesn't have the nutritional value of, we know why soy is limited. This is purely a taste, but all these others, people like the taste, there are people trying them, but why are we, our purchasing is, and purchase of and sales of the non-dairy alternatives is still limited. And we thought, well, okay, are people looking for nutrition? What is it? Why aren't we converting the dairy drinkers? And Michelle's slide, she pointed out that 58% of dairy drinkers also drink dairy alternatives, but they're not buying a lot. Okay, so that's more of a telltale sign. But they're willing to try it. So why aren't they buying more? What is the problem? What is this ceiling that we are up against? So that's where we started changing, and this is really a quantum leap, a change that is occurring now because there's new technology. And we started in 2010 by showing, we can get a whole grain out there. And so we started with the rice beverage and saying, this is whole grain brown rice. So we can deliver a full serving of whole grain brown rice. Yeah, and it tastes like the milk. Very importantly, what happened to allow us to do that? It was new technology. It was the fact that we did figure out how to separate the proteins from the fiber so that we could process them and get them through the heat exchangers. The second thing is we were doing it with brown rice. The stability of the oil was really critical. We didn't know how to stabilize the oil originally, now we do. So this is all very special technology that is now working at Steuben Foods. And they put in a very special plant so that we could accommodate all that. The other area that in 2015 in the focus there, and we'll start to see more of these type of products, is those products that are focused on the nutraceutical value of the raw material. So in the case of flax and the omega-3 and 6s, we'll see more and a growth in that area, as well as the importance of, say, hemp, also with the omegas. That's just one example. There are other products and raw material products that have some very special nutraceutical value, so we'll see a growth in that. And here at the show, we're introducing the Elmhurst line of ingredients. Now, this is a big jump, because instead of using the one or two or being limited to one or two or a couple of nuts in there, we can put the full handful of nuts per serving. Okay, and we were able to do that again because we figured out how to separate the protein from the fiber, so we could remove just the fiber, and that's, by the way, not thrown away. That is used in the crackers and everything. So all these raw materials that are coming in to Steuben's plants, it's product in, everything is utilized, which is another very, very important area to be in. But the four nuts that they launched was the almond, hazelnut, cashew, and walnuts, all significantly different in taste and profile. But if you go to the booth, you'll also see something very miraculous. The proteins being liberated in that way have a functionality that we haven't seen before, okay? And the digestibility. So now we're into the area of dairy saying, well, you don't have anything nutritional. Yes, we do, and it's significant. And you know, whether it's nutraceutical or nutritional on our end, that's really what's going to make the change. These products are just the beginning. As the Plant Association points out, if we can make these milks that have these digestible proteins and functional proteins that are now available, we can make things that have not been made before or just kind of mocked up really close. But now, do they culture like cheeses? Yes, they do. Do they culture like yogurt? Yes, they do. We don't need to use starches or gums or emulsifiers anymore, because when all these compositions were liberated, they start to really have the functionality of dairy milk. Now, that's also an interesting thing, because we chose, and Elmhurst chose to use the word milked. Milked almonds, milked walnuts, milked cashews, milked oats, milked rice, because they are extracting all the nutrients from these raw materials. And so they're very proud to say, no, these things are milked with water. So this is what makes it special. So the foaming is an example of the liberation of the protein. Where you take these milks and very easy to whip up, and they make a nice froth and foam. As I said, even the proteins separated out make some of the most outstanding, in the case of the hemp, which has also been run through this process, makes one of the most outstanding white proteins that's never been seen before, but it is the best texturizable protein that's ever been out there. So we're just at the very, very beginning stage of a whole new products of development, and we're going to see a lot more. Now, these will impact the dairy case, because as you get into a true non-dairy cheese or a true non-dairy yogurt that looks and functions like the yogurt, you bet all of a sudden we will be starting to be very, very competitive as an industry in the dairy market, and these will be refrigerated products. These are ready to go, and so it'll be.
Can you explain the meat analog? What's the application in a meat replacement?
Well, so if you're looking at the current meat replacements, you're dealing with soy. Meat replacement is probably the most popular, or a combination of soy and gluten. Right. Well, now you got the gluten problem.
Right.
Okay, and then of course you've got the mushrooms, you know, that are used as meat analogs and replacers. To have something that's not in any of those categories, let's say from hemp, and that is an example of the hemp meat that we actually made, and then kind of teriyaki did, and, you know, and cooked it. But these are examples of the future, and we're looking over the next 10 years, we're going to see so much more in the dairy, and it really needs to be there, and it will be sharing the case. And so a lot of the other products, and thank goodness the natural foods industry has also expanded, and so they have the refrigerated case there. But I think we're going to see some very popular products now, plant-based products, in the dairy case in the future. So.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. That was exciting stuff. So I'm going to come back to some of what you were talking about, but Doug, I want to bring you in, and I wanted to have you start the conversation by talking about some of your sort of your journey. And I know you worked with White Wave about a good 10 years ago or so talk about that and your path to being at Good Karma and what changes you've seen in this sector.
Sure. So I'm a marketer by trade, so I look at markets, think about how do you execute, go to market, convert consumer purchase dollars into category growth, right? And so it's funny, I was thinking back, I worked in the category from 2004 through 2007, and we did a lot of work back then because that was on sort of phase or era 2 that Cheryl had on her chart there when plant-based milk started to look and emulate a lot more like fresh milk. And so we did a lot of work back then and said, well, how high is up in terms of category penetration? At the time, about 14-15% of US households were annually buying plant-based milks. And we paid some very high-priced consultants to go do some consumer work, and the answer was 22%. And that was back in 2005, 2006. And we're like, wow, there's a lot of growth in this category. Well, we just got household panel data from Nielsen, and it's a little different than the Mintel. I always like actual purchase data better than reported. Reported's always a little overstated. But over 35% of households have bought a plant-based milk product in the past 12 months.
Wow.
So we thought it was 22. It's 35 and growing. So the amount of conversion that's happened through this era of making it look and taste more like milk and operate from and again, marketer here, right? Consumers, think about all your consumption habits. There's reasons for all of them. You're delivering on need states for particular consumption. So if you think about milk consumption, cereal bowl, glass, cooking, smoothie, accompaniment, plant-based milks have gotten a lot better at delivering on core occasions than we've ever been before. And we just get better and better. And some of the new technology, to Cheryl's points, going to be hugely beneficial. So the result of all that is, and I've seen different data, but the number there was about $1.7 billion plant-based milk category on a $14-15 billion fluid milk category. It's about 11 or 12% of total sales. 11 or 12% of all fluid white milk beverage is now made from plants, not animals. Which is cool. I mean, it's awesome. I love this space. Is so much fun because it's growing and happening so fast. And the other cool thing, if you think about tipping points in categories, typically when there's only one reason that people are buying something, you never see this massive tipping point like we've seen in plant-based. But if you think about, again, consumer researcher than I am, there's allergens, there's lactose intolerance, there's just flexitarians and people trading plant and animal calories going on, there's vegans, vegetarians, there's environment and climate reasons, right? There's ethical reasons. There's a gazillion reasons why people are choosing more plant-based milk ounces over animal milk ounces every day. And that's why the category has had an 8 to 10% compound annual growth rate. So it just kind of just keeps doing this. So the future is not only to make it more and more and more grounded in the typical milk categories. I also think the future is adjacent dairy categories. So here's the percent of sales on other dairy category. Just the dairy case, back of the store, right? Refrigerated. Plant-based creamers, a little under 3%. Frozen plant-based ice creams and novelties, 1 to 2%, depending on how you look at the data. Plant-based yogurt, less than 1% is plant-based yogurt. Plant-based cheese, less than 1%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So using my milk example, so why are those underdeveloped? And my message to both retailers and manufacturers is do what milk did. Make those products have great taste, great nutrition, and perfectly match the consumption occasions of those core. Because listen, if you're a yogurt eater, you have such a strong frame of reference. And I go and I love plant-based. I'm going to try this plant-based yogurt. And you dip that spoon on, and it just runs off the spoon. That's not yogurt to that consumer. Or, hey, it's pretty good, but it doesn't quite taste right. Or it's pretty good and it tastes right, and I look and there's no protein in it. Yogurt has protein. So for manufacturers, make those analog consumption occasions deliver against them. So taste, nutrition, functionality, and hit the consumption occasion. And then for retail, we have the conversation all the time because we're in the yogurt space now, and I hear, well, it's only 1% of my sales and it's 2% of my space. Well, I use the example. Anybody ever coach 6 and 7 year olds in soccer? It's like magnet ball. It just everybody falls. Go to where the ball's going to be, right? That's sort of the, you go there. And so if you believe that plant-based is successful because it's a large enough consumption occasion and milk has really set the mark, why isn't it that great yogurt, and why isn't it that sour cream and frozen and cheese can't reach the same levels of development? So as a retailer, don't be a governor of that success, actually enable it. Go to where the ball's going to be, you know? Don't worry about typical space to sales. Invest in the category. Start to create destinations. You go to some accounts and it's like yogurt set, you know, it's like a mile wide and an inch deep and it's huge. It's an $8 billion category and then, I mean, I can't even find my own products there half the time. And it takes you 15 minutes to find it. So let's get really great about developing, both manufacturers and retailers, about developing those segments. And that back case of the wall is a 50, 60, 70 billion dollar consumption case. And so for just all of the other dairy adjacencies, there's hundreds of millions of dollars of growth for all of us, retailers, manufacturers, everyone in the trade to benefit from. And so my sort of soapbox is, you know, we're in a great spot. This is so much fun to see this happening, and for so many reasons. You know, it's a whole different panel, but there's so much really great growth and benefit for every stakeholder in the room, the consumer, the retailer, the manufacturers, that it's, you know, but there's going to be partnership, and we got to keep delivering and expecting a better and higher game for ourselves, and, you know, hold us accountable to deliver that. So, opening comments.
No, great. Thanks, Doug. That was fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I did want to ask about you already touched on this, but I wonder if we could explore a little bit more making the case to retailers, because we know that what helped make the milk category explode was getting it into the fresh case, right, where consumers are looking for regular cow's milk. And, you know, it's gotten to where now, at least at my Safeway, they actually have a shelf, you know, a sticker on the glass that says non-dairy alternative. So, you know, they have their own case, so you can know exactly where to go. There's some that still mix in with milk. It's a little, you know, it's not perfect, but it's gotten a lot better. And, but again, just as a consumer. So my other members are mostly in what Ethan Brown from Beyond Meat calls the penalty box. I call it kind of no man's land in the produce aisle, right? So most of the meat and dairy alternatives are found in the produce aisle, and it's all really, I mean, in some ways, and I've actually heard from some companies who like being in the produce aisle. So that's an interesting conversation, because there's sort of the halo effect of, you know, it's fresh, healthy, right? People are going there looking for fresh foods. It's kind of nice to associate your brand with that. The other way of thinking is, but that's not where most consumers are looking for cheese or meats, right? They're looking for cheese and meats where the other cheese and meats are. So, you know, I've been struggling just as a, you know, trade group representative of how to deal with this question of where should these products be merchandised. I mean, I tend to agree with you, like, we got to put them where consumers are looking for them. But if there's only one or two brands, then, as you say, it's like you can't even see, even in Whole Foods. I mean, again, as a consumer, it drives me crazy, even where, you know, the one place, and, you know, we love Whole Foods, it's just hard to find the plant-based products, especially in the yogurt section where there's just a lot of products. So I'm just curious, what are those conversations like? And Cheryl, if you've had, you know, if you want to jump in here, how do we work with retailers to do a better job at merchandising these foods? Do we need some more data? You know, I've thought about, do we need to do some research to show that, you know, the more these products are highlighted in the right ways, you know, we've talked about integrated but segregated, you know, like where the consumer is looking for it, but making sure that they're clearly delineated. I mean, what are your thoughts on just the retail environment to reach consumers better?
That's more.
Well, I have kind of two thoughts and points to make. Human beings are real creatures of habit. It's really tough and expensive as a marketer to teach new things. So, I mean, Steve Demos's secret was incredibly simple. Put it in a gable-top carton, take soy milk and collapse it to silk. That's where the name came from, all right? And just make it look like milk. Beyond Meat is having tremendous success now, like really an inflection point for the company, putting it in the meat aisle. Looks like any ground beef packet, it's right there, right? And so this notion of being really telegraphic, and I share this with retailers and partners, and we try to do it as companies. I think a lot of companies are doing it incredibly well, but just be telegraphic. Don't try to teach the consumer some other thing. This is what it is. It's just an alternative. It's just different, but it's all for the same stuff. And the other thing I like to do is I use case studies and examples. Let's learn from things that have already happened. And I have had some experience in the gluten-free bakery and bread category. And in the early days of gluten-free, and I use this case study with retailers, it was the consumer actually had a name on how they would use bread, and they'd call it refresh, because the gum and starch technology needed heat to get pliable. Otherwise, if you made a cold gluten-free bread sandwich, it would crumble in your bag as you're taking it to work. And so consumers actually created their own nomenclature. And because it was so hard and not easy for the consumer, the category was like this. So gluten-free bread in 2006-ish was less than a $40 million combined aggregate measured channel category. And then you had technology breakthrough, and people started to invent bread that tasted and operated and functioned like regular bread. And the category grew 50% CAGR for 5 straight years. So it grew to over 400 million in sales. And it was this simple concept. Make bread taste like real bread, right? Genius. No. But that's what happened. And so I use that same analogy with partners that we, hey, let's invest, but let's make sure that we're developing the category the right way.
And I think the point there too is about the categories, even with the breads, people know where to look for, and so if it's gluten-free, it's going to be in the bread section.
Right.
It's not going to be in its own section.
Right.
So case in point with regards to the 2000 development of all the fresh milk that went out there in the gable top, that's where it was successful because it was right next to the dairy case, and they bought into the refrigerated shelf space there. So it grew the category significantly, but we still required some changes in the product categories to make sure not only that it now looks like milk, pours like milk, behaves like milk when they put it over cereal, which is still the #1 uses, but making that change too, that we're giving them a product that now functions. And has a functionality very similar to milk, so for cooking applications and whatnot. So as we get closer and closer, it's going to make more sense to, if people are looking in the refrigerated section, that you do have a nice variation of new products, or the products are there, and whether you're rotating them out and then the slow movers go into the natural foods area, but we're going to stay on the low acid aseptic so that they don't need to be refrigerated. They can handle the slower turns. But
Great.
Right.
Hang on. Just want to ask one more question, and then we'll take audience questions after that. So I want to talk about this issue of you ticked off on the dairy talking points. The first one, which was you can't milk an almond. Now I'm going to tell them actually. Dr. Mitchell says you can. So talk to her about that. But
so does Robert De Niro, by the way.
Oh, really?
Right? Everybody knew the movie. You can milk anything.
yeah, you can milk anything.
Okay, well, there's the higher authority. So on this issue of nutrition, I also want to combine the conversation with price points, because it's certainly true that most of the plant-based, probably all of them, are higher in price than cow's milk. And that hasn't been that much of a barrier. The category has done pretty well, but what I'm seeing is, well, a couple things. I mean, just from a policy standpoint, we know there's lots of reasons that animal products prices are kept artificially low because of the inputs and all of that, but that's a different conversation. What I want to talk about, though, is as we're seeing the more different products come on the market that have better nutrition, shall we say, or different nutrition, does that also go along with higher prices? I'm thinking about more concentrated products that are just more expensive to make, and how do we address that balance of wanting to give consumer good nutrition but it being costlier?
Yeah, well, actually, as time goes on, it's not going to be costly. The price of milk is going to continue going up. So the subsidies are there, and the amount of milk that's available. So the price of milk inevitably will go up, and so all of a sudden we'll come into a little bit more parity as time goes on. So it's just a matter of looking for the future on that one. For right now, the consumers that are on the leading edge of the natural foods industry, and because of where it's marketed, you know, is why we have the higher price. But it's as I said, it's going to get more cost competitive. Even with the Elmhurst brand, it was very interesting as they launched at a higher price point, but there was no complaint by the consumers. In fact, they, in general, when polled, they said, well, gee, that's a great price. So it was a little bit of a stunning idea of that the consumers are willing to pay for nutrition. So,
Doug?
What is the price of milk? Because I don't believe the Class 2 milk market is the true cost of milk.
Right.
There's subsidies, there's all kinds of additional costs that aren't built into it, environmental impacts. And so I don't even think we know what it is. I'll tell you what, I think the consumer is changing the world at an unbelievable pace. If you think about it, and I've seen different studies with different numbers, but the measured retail food business is $650 billion, right? And the top 20 food companies have lost 5 share in 5 years. Well, 5 share, no big deal. $32 billion of revenue. And it's all because this consumer's changing so fast. So the premium thing, I don't even think about it that way anymore, because consumers are not thinking about it that way anymore. Consumers are looking for healthier options, more authentic options, better for, you know, the whole set of stakeholders, including the environment. And they are investing more in food, because all of that 30-something billion is they're all premium products. They're not going to cheaper products. Private label's pretty flat in this country. They're all coming to this industry, whether it's organic or anything else or plant-based. So the consumer's starting to connect it. Does anybody remember the Superfoods RX? It was one of the earliest sort of superfoods books. It was Dr. Stephen Pratt. He's actually an eye doctor, right? But he started seeing these connections between eye health and people's diets, his patients' diets. So he wrote this book, and it was the early stuff, right? Pumpkin seeds. But he had the greatest quote that I think is so true now. He said, you want your health span to match your lifespan. And I think the consumer's voting every day with paying for more premium, better products, less chemicals in their diet, clean eating, and it's the conversion of it's happening at an accelerating rate. So this premium thing, every time nobody will ever pay for that, you realize, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
they're investing not only because they believe in the companies and the brands and the products, but they're also investing because they believe in it for what it's going to do for themselves and, you know, the broader set of stakeholders. So I think the rules are broken forever.
Cool, that's a good quote too.
Yeah.
Take it with you, the rules are broken forever. Okay, well, thank you. All right, well, I'm going to open it up. We have a good 15 minutes for questions. Yes, Helen.
I have a question about the plant-based consumer. So, you know, you were just mentioning that there's all kinds of reasons why people choose plant-based. I'd be curious about the overall perception of healthiness of the product versus cow milk. So what is your experience with the consumer? I know if someone has an allergy or is lactose intolerant, and that's very specific.
Right.
But what kind of trends do you see generally of the perception of healthiness, and is it rooted in some science too versus cow milk?
you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Science is interesting, but I'm not sure consumers believe science anymore. In the 1980s, and that's true for a lot of authority things. Recall that saturated fat's horrible for you. And we're going to do everything we can from a health policy standpoint to get people to eat less saturated fat. What's the #1 cause of cardiovascular disease in this country? Hydrogenated oils. Right, maybe not, but it's a huge contributor, which is totally counter to what fat's back, right? Fat is big and it's back. So I think the consumer's starting to figure this out for themselves, and the science piece of it is interesting, but maybe not always or ever relevant. So the biggest push we see right now in plant-based is the younger cohort, millennials in particular. Millennials are starting a predominance, having children and families, and so all of these sort of choices they've started to make are now getting ingrained in real consumption dollars and real purchasing power. And then that's starting to trickle over. What I've found fascinating is boomers are one of the fastest kind of healthy product conversion measures, because back to that health span, lifespan thing. So it's happening across the board, and the consumers are seeing, and it's for lots of, it's even hard to get your hands wrapped around, because there's overall kind of macro health stuff, and then there's all the micro stuff. So we get calls all the time from 65-year-old men who say, my wife said I got to get more omega-3s. You know, can I get a coupon for your flax milk? So, and that's not our core consumer, but there's a lot of them. So it's this really interesting dynamic that is pretty broad and pretty deep. And again, I've been a food marketer and been in the food industry for a long time. I've never seen anything like this. It's just amazing to watch.
I think it also has to do with the options. So there's more and more different plant-based milk options. And it was kind of interesting, even Elmhurst had to make a decision, were they going to fortify? Okay, most milks, dairy milks, and a lot of people will drink dairy milk because of calcium, and certainly the early milks, they were all fortified with A&D and calcium.
Right.
But the calcium was there for another reason. It was to give it more the milk body type of thing, rather than just the calcium itself. But, you know, it'll be interesting that the new consumers, the millennials, the bobos that are out there, are sitting there saying, no, I'll get that in my other food sources,
right.
And plant-based food sources. You don't have to put it in the milk. If we're dealing with an almond milk, or and getting all the nutritional value that I want to get out of the almond milk, that's the one I want to go. Don't keep on adding stuff to it if you don't have to.
Would you say that if you basically match the experience and the taste and the nutrition and the usage occasions, that the plant-based is perceived as the healthier option?
I would say, yeah, the trend is going to be, well, and also, again, maybe I'm thinking too much in the future, but as we approach 2040 and 2050, we are going to be, the nutritional bang for your buck is going to be, that's what the name of the game is going to be, and it's going to be about sustainability. And the plant-based is going to be where we're going to have to be in order to get out there. And people want to build that comfort, and they want to be able to, if they can't buy the dairy milk, then they want something that's very similar functionally, taste-wise, or gives them something that they can use in all different forms. And I think the industry, meaning the alternative milk industry, has done an excellent job kind of raising their standards of these products. And I think we'll continue to grow. So,
well, your question is actually reminding me that I don't think I did ask you to talk about the history of the Elmhurst brand, and I think it really goes to this question of, is cow's milk, I think all agree in this room, cow's milk is not the gold standard for nutrition, but this idea that people have to get certain nutrients only from one source in general is silly.
Right.
It's true historically, right, that cow's milk certainly was a source of important nutrients, but Americans aren't in the same place they were when that was an important factor in the American diet. And so, my answer is always, look, there's a whole diet, there's a whole day's, a whole week's worth of eating to get one's nutrients. And I know, just again as a consumer, like I don't consume milk in any form for its protein or calcium content, right? I mean, I use it over cereal. So I just think, I think there certainly is no question that consumers are looking into alternatives for health reasons. But I think more importantly is we should not be, Michael Pollan talks about nutritionism, and there's just too much like obsession, I think, with,
Yes.
one particular source of protein or calcium. Well, of course, vitamin D is added, by the way, by the milk industry. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. But I wanted to just back up, and because I think it is related to this question, given that this company has gone from being a cow's milk company to a plant milk company. So we'll just talk about that for a minute and maybe how that philosophy has even shifted.
Well, yeah, and this was with the Elmhurst brand. The Elmhurst dairy in Jamaica, Queens, New York, was a dairy in operation and basically delivering milk throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City for the last 90 years. Okay, and they were the last ones operating right in the middle of the city. For a lot of reasons, it became not a beneficial business model anymore. There were restrictions on the bridges, what they could tanker over and out as far as bringing the milk in. So they couldn't even bring in full truckloads anymore. So that was basically they could no longer operate efficiently and cost effectively. So while it was obvious from a business point of view that the Elmhurst Dairy in Queens had to shut down, the owner at that time was also in discussions with myself, and we were talking about the significance of plant-based products, which he was a firm believer in as far as looking at the next generation of what really needed to be supported. And really, and it was in his heart and the concept, it was consistent with regard to delivering nutrition to your doorstep. Okay, whether it was from cows or whether it was from plants. This is about delivering and getting nutrition out to the people. And if he'd have it his way, he'd use all his milk trucks to deliver it to your doorstep. And in the same way that dairy milk was what was done. And really, this goes back to in the 1800s, they were drinking all kinds of things, predominantly water, what they had available. It was in 1946 with the school lunch program where milk was actually a positive part of that milk program to maximize the nutritional part of it. In fact, they couldn't get subsidy unless milk was part of it.
Still true.
Right, so that's what really got everybody and all our parents, and we're still kind of with that dogma of milk has to be part of a healthy diet.
Right.
Okay, well, that's not necessarily true. It never was. It was a good thing at that time, and during the war years, it was an easy way to get protein into the diets and the school lunch programs, and so everybody just kind of went along with that whole dogma. It really was. But anymore, it's like, no, you don't have to eat just rice and beans, or you don't have to just eat potatoes or oats. You could have a whole diet of just oats and you'd be fine. But you'd balance it out with other things. But anymore, we have options. There are a lot of different food categories that, you're not just walking into a general store and buying a 100-pound sack of beans. You have a lot of options of different products in the retailer. And the alternatives are just the ones that are coming up and showing. And I think the industry is doing a heck of a job.
Okay, thanks. So I'll pick up on the, you said something, of course, that pricks my political ears, which is the school lunch program. And, the way I describe the political influence of the dairy lobby is that if you look at the rules around school food, there are nutrition requirements, of course, that schools have to meet to get the federal reimbursement for, the school meal program that public schools participate in. The only food that is required is milk. So in other words, there has to be a certain amount of protein, calories, et cetera, which makes sense, right? That we would require nutrients. We want to make sure our school children are getting good nutrients. But milk is literally the only food. Milk isn't a nutrient, but the dairy lobby has, I think, quite brilliantly gotten milk to be equated with nutrition gold, right? And so that's why they have this special place on the school meal tray. And to this day, it is still a federal requirement that cow's milk be served to every single school child, that a school wants that, critical federal reimbursement in order to serve, a much reduced or free school meal to mostly poor children in our school system. So, I just think it's important to just again, use that as a real indicator of what we're up against. And, there are some exceptions allowed. If you bring a note from your doctor, you can get an alternative, but they still make it very difficult. And for a long time, it was only whole milk, actually, that was required, because the dairy industry makes the most money from whole milk. But because of the nutrition dogma that said, that wasn't a good thing anymore.
Michelle, whatever. I'm gonna keep fighting.
Yeah.
I can care less. I'm gonna keep fighting for this
No,
consumer.
I hear you, but I'm just saying.
I think we might have had since we're
I have one question. Hopefully it's brief, but I think it will be. But this might be actually for you, Doug, and possibly for the association. The industry as a whole, and my background is I'm a product formulator, and I'm part of Elmhurst Milk, and we're going forward with the plant-based and sort of the conversion of the milk dairy industry to the plant-based industry. And we always have these internal conversations. But from an industry standpoint, is there a possibility that when a converter goes to the supermarket, they're looking at meats, okay, chicken, pork, beef. They want their milk, cow, and in some cases goat. Is there a possibility that there's too much available options in the plant-based realm, that it's actually causing confusion? We already know about the fact that it's being placed in 55 different places in the store, and that's confusing. But when you have 15 options, how, as an industry, do we make sure that we continue to grow this industry and not cause consumer confusion?
So your question is too much a bad thing, and in terms of options, and my answer is let the consumer decide. Yeah. I just think that more is better. Do I get concerned with the listen, flax milk's a little late comer to the party as well. Am I concerned that there's the umpteenth variety or umpteenth version? Yeah, and sometimes it can confuse consumers and create some chaos in the category, but I'd rather have the consumer have options and vote with their dollars. And I also think that I love this industry because we're competitors and friends at the same time, and we're all sort of trying to do the same thing. And I love that PBFA's kind of helping create some of the fabric of the plant-based foods industry. And I love it because, hey, competition makes you better. If somebody comes out with the next thing, and Elmhurst is a great example, and I think they're going to really set a new standard for nutrition and that new high water mark, and it's going to make us all think about the consumer voting in that direction and how can we get better. So I don't have any problem with it. I think it's a good thing generally, and I welcome it across every category in the dairy set for sure. I'm looking forward. I can't wait to see what 5 years from now looks like.
Yeah, a quick answer and we'll wrap up, is that there may be I always think we see lots of products here at the show, but at my local Safeway, I think there's maybe 3 companies represented in the dairy and the milk section. Right. So, we have a long way to go to, create some balance even in cows' products versus plant-based. So, and of course yogurt, oh my God, like you say, yardage, that we'd want some, make a dent in. So there's, I'm worried about just getting room on the shelf.
Yeah, but I think it's not only the consumer, but we're talking about the buyers here too.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And being informed buyers for the stores and looking at it, that's why it's really important to continue to be educated as to what is out there, what is going to come, what is truly, of value to your consumers. That's that's really where the number one decision-making process starts, to even get it out there in the shelf is what the buyers are doing.
Well, with that, I will wrap up and thank our panelists so much for this wonderful discussion, and thank you all for participating, and the future looks bright for plant-based, that's for sure. So thank you.
Thank you.